Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to take a deep dive into the Big Hunt, which is the Snagga detachment for the Ork Codex, and it's kind of neat, so I look forward to getting into it with everybody. Before we dig in, there's a link in the description and we'll do a little comment with it. These are the Cromlech Mega Knobs. I actually had a whole bunch of these right before my fire. I am going to slowly start replacing them. They are fantastic. They're super cool looking. They are resin. So it's one of those, if you like these, and I do, I think they look a lot better than GW's Mega Knobs units. Click the link in the description, pick them up on Amazon. You can get some models. It helps support me. It helps you get cool units and models for your army, and everybody wins, and it doesn't cost you anything additional. As always, we're going to talk about the detachment rules, then we're going to talk about the enhancements, stratagems, competitive viability. And again, I'm not giving the example list. I leave it up there so that if you guys want one, it's more of a reminder for me to let you know, hey, if you want this, let me know in the comments and I will make sure I get one put together and then I'll share it as a PDF in the comments. But I'm not going to do a whole walkthrough of a list just because I want to keep these videos as short as I can. And we've done a good job. We've kept them about 15 to 20 minutes. So that's my goal. And if we did a list walkthrough, that could be its own separate video. First, we're going to talk about the detachment rule. At the start of the command phase, you choose either a vehicle, a monster, or a warlord, and if none of those units are on the battlefield or embarked within a transport on the battlefield, you can choose one character unit instead. And then until the start of the next command phase, you'll get to reroll charge rolls into that unit. And then anytime a Snagga unit makes an attack against that unit, you improve the AP of that attack by 1. And that's for both shooting and melee. The unit you pick is called your prey unit. So anytime you attack your prey unit, you get to reroll charges into the prey and you get to improve your AP by 1 into the prey. Overall, I think this is actually a really cool detachment. We're going to dig into it a little bit more later, but I like how flavorful it is, but I also like that there's a competitive viability to it. It is very matchup specific, but getting an additional AP is fantastic when most of the Ork index, or I guess Codex now, is neg 1 or neg 2, and there's the prevalence of things like Armor of Contempt or 4-up invulns. It really helps pushing that 2-up to a 4-up instead of a 2-up to a 3-up type of thing. We're going to go over enhancements first. The first one is Proper Killy. It's 15 points. I love it. +1 damage is fantastic. I don't like that I have to have an enhancement, but when you look at the Ork index, there's almost no 3 damage melee outside of Death Dreads and Bigger. And it's one of the things that always frustrated me about this army, especially in 10th. When I go into non-melee armies like Votann, for example, and their Berserks are doing 3 damage melee, but I still have Mega Knobs that are cranking out 2 damage melee, it's a little frustrating. Like, I don't get angry about it, but it's one of those where I'm being shoehorned into playing a melee army because of how the shooting is. Could I at least get some infantry based 3 damage melee? Charge me more points, man. Just give me some 3 damage. So this I like. It is only on the character, but I like having access to it. The Beast Boss on Squigosaur getting an additional damage on its melee units or melee attacks is very good. And it's pretty cheap at 15 points. So it's to me going to be almost an auto take. If you've got the extra 15 points, you're slapping it on, and then you're going to torpedo that unit into something. It's kind of how it's set up to be. Glory Hog can only go on a Squigosaur boss, and that unit gets a 9-inch scout move. Uh, oh man, that's worth 30 points. The whole unit being able to pregame 9-inch move, and then they move 10 base. So if you go first, you basically have 19 inches plus a charge, and they're, I think, T7, 3 wounds, 4-up save, 5-up feel no pain, and the knob is now part of the unit, and the knob has 4 wounds. It's a tanky unit, so you could kind of finagle them onto an objective, and, you don't want them out in the open because they'll still get killed. But if you could put them on an objective, and keep them pretty well hidden, then if your opponent is able to get them, they're generally not going to be able to get them with the full brunt of their damage. So you shouldn't be picking them up if you play them smart. I like Glory Hog. I think you're going to see that in a lot of games just because of the ability to try to get objectives early with a large tanky unit. Scrag every stash is 25 points. A unit gains sticky objectives and it triggers at the end of the command phase. I don't think this is bad, but when base boys do the same thing, and they're only like 80 points for 10 wounds, it's weird. It's one of those where maybe if you have 20, 25 points, I guess 25, but if you have the extra points and you want to put it on a unit, you could. It's, to me, not the best use of 25 points, but if you've just got them sitting there, and there's ways you could do it too, like if you had them and you had a pain boss and a beast boss, because I believe you could put both in the Snagga units. You could throw one. You could give like the beast boss or the you could give the pain boss sticky objectives. So it's one of those like there's ways to utilize it. I just think, man, Gretchen are 40 points. They give you a potential command point, and they could just sit on the objective, and the only thing you have to worry about is indirect. So yeah, it's one of those like to me, I just don't think this is the best use of your 25 points, but I could see it seeing play. And then the last one is Surly as a Squigoth. The Squigosaur unit gains -1 to wound if the strength of the attack is higher than the toughness. This is great. I am disappointed that it has the strength toughness trigger, but Knobs also went that way. And I don't know, maybe a lot of things have gone that way. I haven't really paid attention to what our other armies are having at this point. And overall, it's still a really good durability bonus when you've got T3, you goose, T7 and 3 or more wounds, and now they're -1 to wound versus most anti-tank guns. It's still a solid choice because most of those guns are now wounding you on 4s instead of 3s, and then a handful of them go to 3s from 2s, but there's not a ton of that. Let's talk about the stratagems. Most of them are situationally good. I don't think any of them are really bad, and there's a couple that have some ambiguous wording, so we're going to dig into them just a little bit. Unstoppable momentum. You roll a die for each model in a mounted Snagga unit, and on a 4-up, you do a mortal wound. You get to roll 3 extra dice if you're charging your prey. This does cap at 6 mortal wounds. This is a pretty solid tank shock strat for mounted units. It is situationally good, but it is good. You know, being able to do out of phase damage is never bad. And if you've got, 9, like a massive unit, you're going to probably do your 6 mortal wounds. And at the end of the day, again, out of phase damage is never bad. As an orc player, I abuse grenades and tank shock. And so I expect this to kind of fall into that same category. And it does effectively give me 2 tank shocks because the kill rigs, unless they've changed, have the vehicle keyword, so I can tank shock with a kill rig, and then I can charge with mounted, and I can effectively get 2 tank shocks in a single turn. So overall, I like it. I think it's pretty solid. Again, situational. You're going to want it for units that are going to be able to kind of withstand your normal damage. It's going to be really good for maybe clearing out some extra 1 wound infantry bodies if you've got a more elite unit going into them. Drag it down. Snagga units gain sustained 1 in melee. They crit on 5s if you're targeting your prey. First of all, getting sustained in the fight phase is good for orcs. Look at the detachment now. No, it's not competitively busted, but that's where they do all of their damage. So getting sustained, great. Now it is a Snagga unit, but think about it this way. If you've got a unit of 20 Snagga boys that re-roll hits, going into a vehicle, if that vehicle is your prey, you're now at -2. So you're now re-rolling hits, sustained, and crit on 5s because it's your prey, and -2 because it's your prey. So it's one of those like, nah, this is a pretty solid strat. It is, again, situationally good. There's going to be times where you don't necessarily need to or want to use it. But in the right situation, it's going to be very good. You're going to do a lot of chip damage. You're going to do a lot of extra damage that you wouldn't normally do. And again, fives explode is a staple in the current index. So fives explode working on Snagga units, going to be good. It is, like I said, situationally good, but it's going to be good. That one's even bigger. You get advance and fallback and charge. The wording on this is very ambiguous. I don't have the full codex in front of me. I should have it in the next couple days, but I don't have it in my hands yet. And so I'm going off of, internet leaks and stuff like that when we talk about these. And the wording is super ambiguous on the internet leak because it says advance and charge, fall back and charge if charging your prey. So I don't know if the intent was that you always advance and charge, but you can fall back and charge if you get to charge your prey, or if the strat only works if you're charging your prey. Overall, in its worst case scenario, it's situationally good. Advance and charge is always a good thing to have with orcs, which is why we get it on the WA, right? And then fall back and charge. I've not run into a ton of situations where I feel like I need it, but having it in my pocket is always nice. So again, in the worst case scenario, it's situationally good. It could help something get stuck in as long as you can target your prey. Best case situation, it just improves your mobility very well by giving any one unit on the table advance and charge. So again, to me, at its worst, it's a situationally good strat, and that's never a bad thing. It kind of these strat selections remind me of the GSC strats from Ninth Ed. All of them were good in the right situation, and that's kind of what I'm seeing here. Is a lot of this stuff is just good in the right situation. There's nothing that's game breaking, and you're just like, I'm going to use this every turn. But a lot of them are just like, here's a tool for a specific job, and you're going to see this at least once in a game. So this strat will be viable at least once in a game. And that's what I'm taking from this detachment stratagems. Where do you think you're going? When an enemy unit falls back from a Snagga infantry mounted unit, that unit can make a normal move of 6. I really like this strat. It's gonna take some play to kind of fine tune the best way to use it. But if somebody falls back with the intent of countercharging with another unit and getting the unit that fell back maybe on an objective, etc., you could make that move and make their countercharge harder, stuff like that. You could even move forward to gain ground and then go take an objective if you're close enough. So again, you're not going to use it every turn, and you're not even going to use it every time people fall back. But there's going to be a lot of situations that come up throughout the course of many games where you're like, man, this is actually a really handy strat because you fell back, I can now move on to this objective. And now you may have thought about charging this other unit, but because I moved on to this objective, you have to decide if you want to give me those points or if you want to go charge this other unit. And that's where it gets really interesting because you know, a lot of people, when they look at something, they're like, how does this help me in a very direct way? And when you look at it in more of an indirect way, you start to see, okay, if I use this, how can I force my opponent to make some hard decisions? And that kind of harkens back to when I used to talk about how I liked Incubi before they got points drops, and everybody was like, oh, Incubi are trash. But the Incubi to me were a very good deterrent. And if my incubi being on the table changed the course of a game, then that's a win for me. And that's how I see this strat specifically is if my opponent knows I have it and it drastically changes some of their decision making process and I don't even have to use it, then that's a win for me. That's a hey, okay, you're having to make a lot more difficult decisions because of this tool that I have in my toolbox. So that's again just how I look at it. Stalk and tactics. An infantry or mounted unit gains cover. Infantry unit gains stealth. I think this is a good strat. It's not amazing. It does give Squig Hog Boys to a 3+ save with cover. If you've got Snaggas out in the open, they can get a 4+ save with stealth. And it's not a crazy durability buff, but if you were going to go to ground with the unit anyway, you might as well just give them stealth at the same time. Getting that 4-up with a 6-up feel no pain and stealth should help keep them on the table for a bit. Instinctive Hunters, a snag unit not within engagement range, can go into strategic reserves at the end of the enemy fight phase. This is hands down the best strat for this detachment because it has a ton of utility. You could pick a unit up to get it into a different position so that you could try to apply pressure on a different side of the board. You could pick a unit up and put it on an objective or in a table quarter for investigate signals, etc. You could pick a unit up turn 1 if you go second and then have it way up the table turn 1 on your turn. So again, there's just a lot of utility here and a lot of good usage. I think this is an awesome strat. This is a big part of the, I don't know if it's still going around, but the Inceptors turn 1 deep strike is like, I pick it up. If I go second, I get to just pick it up, and then in my turn, I get to put it down. And it's a very similar interaction. Yes, nothing you're going to put down is going to be as scary as 3-inch deep striking Inceptors because you're going to have to make those 8-inch charges. But overall, it's not a bad strat. It'll allow you to score points. It'll allow you to reposition a unit if you got them out of position a little bit. And so it's one of those where, to me, this is hands down the best strat in the Codex. Well, not in the Codex, in this detachment. And this is one that you will probably use every game. This is probably the only strat that gets used literally every game. Competitively, I think this detachment is a lot stronger than people give it credit for. I've talked to some folks and I've read some of the internet reviews, and they're like, well, this one's very meh, very average. And I disagree. I think the Cult of Speed competitively is the worst detachment, not because of its scoring potential, but because of its lack of real damage output. On paper, yes, it does look situational and matchup dependent, and it is true to an extent. But players that don't play Orks have to understand that since their release, the Snagga units have generally been some of the most competitively viable units. In ninth ed, a lot of comp lists were Snagga, 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 and even in 10th ed, you still see a lot of that, like Squig Hog Boys, Kill Rigs, stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, you see other things like Flash Gits, etc., but there's not really been a time since they've come out where Snagga units haven't been good, at least to the extent where like they're not coming to comp lists. You could make a comp list without them, but a lot more have them than don't. And so they're just good data sheets compared to the non-Snagga counterparts. And a good example of that is if we look at boys. Boys are strength 4, and now they have sticky objectives, which is awesome. That's their special ability now. Snaggas are strength 5, and they reroll hits against vehicles and monsters, and they get a 6-up feel no pain. And they're both T5 with a 5-up save. And there's only like a 1 or 2 point per model difference between them. I think Snaggas are 100 and boys are 80 as of right now. So for 20 extra points, I get a feel no pain. I get higher strength in melee. And I get to re-roll hits into vehicles and monsters. So overall, to me, Snaggas just are a little bit more point efficient when you look at their non-Snagga counterparts. Now, that doesn't mean you're always going to take the Snaggas, because if you look at Squig Hog Boys and then you compare them, I guess the closest analogy would be the bikes. The bikes have more utility for scoring. The Squig Hog Boys are a bit more of a damage dealing unit. So the role is slightly different. And we'll see how that shakes out once the new Codex and the new points and stuff are out. I do think this is going to be, to some degree, a bit of a gatekeeping army, kind of like Knights are. You're going to be able to bully those kind of mid-table armies like Knights, where it's, if you don't have the tools to deal with this, You're going to struggle, but if you do have the tools to deal with it, I'm going to struggle. And that's kind of how Knights and Chaos Knights, etc., have interacted, except for like the little bit of time where they're sometimes kind of silly one way or the other. Generally speaking, they're a very direct army, and I feel like this detachment gives you a lot of tools for dealing with that type of stuff and could really hamper the viability of Knights and Chaos Knights because of their specificity into vehicles and monsters. I could be wrong. This is what I see as like, okay, this could be one of those like mid-table bully matchups where it's like you won't see them necessarily hit top tables a lot, but they're gonna maybe in a 40-person GT, you may see one or two top 10 just because of their ability to go into things like Knights and Chaos Knights that normally kind of gatekeep some of those higher positions. Again, could be wrong. Just my 2 cents. Overall, I think it has plenty of play. There's a solid durability to the army and solid damage output. I do like the flavorful detachment rules. Yes, it can be gamed by your opponent simply by keeping those units back. But like I said, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If your opponent's like, haha, you won't get an army bonus because I'm going to keep this vehicle back. Well, now that vehicle, if it's one that normally needs to interact, is not interacting, that's not really a loss for me. It's more of a trade. And then it just becomes who trades better. Do you trade better by not having this thing interacting, or do I trade better by not getting my army detachment? So it'll be curious to see it on the table. I am going to try to get some games in with it at some point. I don't know when, but I do look forward to kind of checking it out and seeing what it can do. I think it's 3.5 out of 5 teeth. I don't think it's good enough to sit with Green Tide and Bully Boys, but I do think it outperforms the Cult of Speed. And that matchup specificity does mean it's going to be very bad into some armies, but very good into other armies. And overall, I think, like I said, I think it's going to be one of those kind of like mid-table nightmare type matchups where it's if you have the tools to deal with it, it's not going to be too bad. But if you don't have the tools to deal with it, it's going to really feel bad. And that's kind of how I see this detachment. But like I said, overall, really good. And I think because of the viability of most of the Snagga data sheets, and if points stay generally the same, the efficiency of most of the Snagga data sheets, I think it plays just fine. Thanks a lot to our YouTube member, Kevin. I appreciate you, buddy. Big shout out to you. You're the man. The real Donnie G, Hatchling, appreciate you, buddy. My Phoenix, Jamie, you're awesome. Thank you so much. And then Lord Wellingstone, Danny Boy, and Captain Too Tall again. Immortals, you guys are the real OGs. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the video.